The fluorescent lights above buzzed louder than usual that morning, or maybe it was just the pressure behind my eyes. I stood in Devin Krantz's office doorway, still gripping my phone with trembling fingers. The text from the hospital was burned into my brain. You should come now. No updates, no pleasantries, just urgency. Devin didn't even glance up from his dual monitors as I cleared my throat. "Devin," I said, voice strained. "My father's in intensive care. They don't think he's going to make it. I need 3 days, maybe 4. He clicked something on his screen lips, pursed in mock concentration. "It's quarter end. HR compliance packets are due. You're the only one who handles the filings. I can train someone. I'll write a checklist. I don't pay you to write checklists." He finally looked up. "You're not special, Thorne. Everyone's got drama. Cover your shift or clean out your desk." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. The sheer coldness of it stunned me. After 5 years of loyal work, staying late, never missing deadlines, never complaining. He couldn't spare me 3 days. I walked out without another word. No email, no resignation. I just left. The same way a limb goes numb after frostbite. Quiet, detached. My father died 2 days later, just after sunrise. I held his hand through his final breaths, watched his chest rise and fall until it didn't anymore. The nurse said he went peacefully, but my world fractured in that moment, and no amount of calm voices could put it back together. The rest of the week blurred hospital paperwork, funeral planning bills I couldn't afford. I stood in front of my father's closed casket in a second-hand dress and wondered how life had gotten so hollow. A few of his neighbors showed up, one old friend from his government job, but mostly it was quiet. A week later, I returned to work. I told myself I needed the paycheck, that I'd act like none of it had happened, that I'd keep my head down and move on. But when I stepped off the elevator and turned the corner to my department, I saw 3 people waiting by my cubicle, our CEO, and 2 men I didn't recognize. One of them held out a badge and said my name. Maribel Thorne. "We need a word." We sat in a small glass conference room usually reserved for quarterly HR reviews. The blinds were drawn, but I could still hear the hum of printers and the idle chatter of people who had no idea what was unfolding a few feet away. The man who had spoken to me first introduced himself as Agent Breyer. His partner, a quiet woman with sharp eyes and a government-issue laptop, didn't say much, just typed steadily as he spoke. Miss Thorne were investigating a series of internal anomalies related to payroll documentation, benefits, eligibility audits, and whistleblower reroutes, all of them traced back to your employee credentials. I blinked. That can't be right. I don't even have clearance for half of that. Agent Breyer didn't flinch. Someone accessed Vanguard's compliance server using your login over a period of 6 years. Hundreds of changes, mostly redactions or deletions. Your profile shows consistent access logs, always from company terminals, always tied to your name. My mouth went dry. You think I did this? We're not assuming anything yet. But the fraud spans nearly $4.2 million unpaid overtime, denied benefits, falsified terminations. Several complaints filed by warehouse workers never made it past intake. We believe someone erased them intentionally. I sat there frozen, a dull roar building in my ears. I had spent 5 years in that cubicle doing the grunt work no one else wanted, updating contact sheets, logging time cards, double-checking insurance forms. I barely had time to breathe, let alone access internal fraud systems. But that was the point, wasn't it? I was invisible, quiet, trustworthy, and I'd never made waves. The perfect camouflage. "Have you ever shared your login credentials with anyone?" Agent Breyer asked. "No," I said. "Never." He studied me for a long moment, then glanced at his partner. She rotated the laptop toward me. "Recognize any of these documents?" There were hundreds of forms I'd never touched, reports I'd never seen, all stamped with my name. I stared at the screen numb. "I didn't do this," I whispered. Agent Breyer nodded. "Then someone wanted it to look like you did." I left the building through the freight exit, afraid that every familiar hallway now hid something I'd never seen before. The only person who might have understood what was happening wasn't around to explain, but he'd left me something. The apartment still smelled faintly like my father's aftershave. That quiet scent lingered, even though everything else about his absence felt loud. His missing coffee cup on the counter, his worn slippers tucked neatly by the door untouched. I stood in front of his old desk, the one he never let me organize. He always claimed it looked messy, but made perfect sense to him. Loose pens, a half-used calendar from 2 years ago, and a cluttered drawer that stuck every time you tried to open it, except this time when I pulled something caught behind it. I reached under and found a thin latch I'd never noticed before. It clicked softly, releasing a hidden panel near the bottom. Inside was a small sealed envelope with my name in his handwriting. It read, "Only open if they come for you." My throat tightened. I broke the seal with trembling fingers and slid out the contents. A single USB drive labeled Vanguard, July, Truth, and a note Maribel. "If you're reading this, they've made you a target. I couldn't tell you I had to protect you from the fallout. But you've always been stronger than you knew. Use this only if they betray you. You'll know what to do. Love, Dad." I stared at the drive for a long time before plugging it into his old laptop. It asked for a password. I tried his birthday, then mine, then the name of our old dog. None worked. But when I typed in my mother's name, the one he never spoke aloud, the files unlocked. Folders upon folders, spreadsheets of labor statistics, payroll discrepancies, screenshots of internal memos marked confidential. Each file bore names I recognized, names from my department, names from the executive board. It wasn't just negligence, it was orchestration. My father, the quiet man who watched Jeopardy with a cup of black coffee every night, had been tracking something massive, methodical as ever, even in secret. And now that burden was mine. I spent the next 3 hours reading in stunned silence until one name surfaced again and again in the logs, bold, underlined, and unmissable. Devin Krantz. Each night I sat hunched over Dad's laptop at the kitchen table, surrounded by half-drunk mugs of tea and legal pads filled with my frantic handwriting. Every file I opened revealed another thread, another lie, another wound stitched shut with corporate indifference. The scheme was layered, strategic, insidious. Warehouse workers clocking 46 hours a week were logged as part-time on paper. Medical benefits withheld due to clerical errors that never got corrected. Bonuses issued to executives based on phantom cost savings. Thousands of dollars rerouted through third-party subcontractors that didn't exist. But the most damning details weren't the numbers. It was the approval trail. Buried in the metadata of every altered document was a digital signature mine, my login, my name. I hadn't just been overlooked. I'd been turned into a shield. And there, anchoring it all, was Devin. His name appeared in nearly every internal memo. He signed off on every falsified audit. He authorized the terminations, the denials, the deletions. And behind it, I could feel my father's presence, methodical, restrained but driven. He had connected the dots long before anyone else saw a pattern. Maybe he even knew he was being watched. The files were scrubbed clean of anything that might trace back to him except what he wanted them to find. I stared at one particular memo marked, "Do not forward," where Devin instructed another manager to run all compliance reports through Thorne's account to minimize scrutiny. They had made me the alibi. I sat there barely breathing, the reality sinking in deeper than shock could soften. This wasn't incompetence. It was design. Every time someone like Penny from fulfillment lost her overtime, someone at the top got richer, and someone like me, a nobody, was used as the firewall. I glanced over at the USB still plugged into the laptop, then down at my father's note. They'd taken everything from him, his integrity, his final days, even me. And now they were going to pay. I reached for my phone and opened a new tab in my browser. Not for the FBI. Not yet. I had a different name in mind, someone Vanguard had once tried and failed to buy out. Redwell Freight's corporate office smelled like polished marble and quiet aggression. The receptionist glanced at my wrinkled blazer and scuffed flats with the kind of raised eyebrow curiosity that never needed words. I didn't care. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there to end something. Cordelia Banks greeted me personally, Executive Vice President of Development, rumored to be the steel spine behind Redwell's expansion strategy. She had a handshake like a closed deal and eyes that scanned for weakness. I didn't give her any. We met in a sleek corner office with a skyline view and soundproof walls. I placed the USB on the table between us like a loaded weapon. "I'm not looking for hush money," I said. "I have the documents to sink Vanguard, payroll fraud, benefits theft, internal memos, everything tied to executive signatures." Cordelia folded her hands, studying me. "And you're offering this to us instead of the government. Why?" "Because I want more than a prosecution," I said. "I want leverage. Real change." I outlined my terms. $10 million wired directly to an account of my choosing. Full-time employment offers to every displaced warehouse worker within a 100-mile radius. And a permanent legal division funded by Redwell, named after my father, dedicated solely to fighting wage theft and labor abuse across the industry. She didn't blink. She just leaned back in her chair, a slow smile forming. "You're not who I expected," she said. "But I respect what you're doing." I didn't smile back. "Do we have a deal?" She nodded. "You've got yourself a deal." We spent the next 3 hours finalizing the framework. Legal teams were looped in. I signed nothing until the transfer cleared. When it did, I walked out of that building $10 million richer and carrying something far more valuable momentum. I didn't call Devin. I didn't warn him. I went back to my apartment, made tea, and watched the city lights flicker through the blinds. By morning, Redwell's lawyers had already begun their approach to the authorities, only this time they were the heroes. And Vanguard had no idea the floor was about to give out beneath them. The headlines broke like thunder. Vanguard Freight under federal investigation for wage, theft benefits, fraud Redwell Freight uncovers, industry corruption hands over key evidence. Whistleblower files suggest years of systemic abuse. I watched it all unfold from my couch slippers on tea cooling in my hand. No one mentioned my name. Redwell kept their word. Cordelia's team spun the narrative perfectly concerned competitors, corporate responsibility, civic duty. The media ran with it. 3 days in the IRS raided Vanguard's headquarters. Agents in black windbreakers poured through the glass doors as confused employees were ushered out with cardboard boxes and blank expressions. I recognized several faces. Some of them had laughed when I cried in the break room after Devin refused me leave. By the end of the week, 2 executives had resigned. Another fled to the Bahamas and was promptly subpoenaed. Vanguard's stock plummeted. Investors panicked. Lawsuits followed. I stayed quiet. There was something surgical about it, watching the building fall brick by brick without lifting another finger. I didn't need to scream or make speeches. I just needed to watch. Devin was still there from what I could tell. He hadn't been arrested yet, but his name was beginning to appear in the lower paragraphs of articles. Regional compliance lead, key personnel. The water was rising around him, and he didn't even know where the leak started. He had taken away my father's final days. He had used my name to steal from people who couldn't afford to lose anything. He thought I'd crawl back to that desk and beg for a job. Instead, I gave my silence a name and a price tag and watched as his world came undone. I didn't want him to hear it on the news. I wanted him to see it on paper. So I printed the press release Redwell sent to federal prosecutors, folded it carefully, and walked into Vanguard's office for the last time. Devin looked up from the front desk, visibly pale like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't even speak before I handed him the envelope. Devin didn't open the envelope right away. He just stared at it like it might burn his hands. I didn't wait around to see what happened when he read it. I had work to do. Within a month of the settlement, I registered the Thorn Initiative as a nonprofit organization. I kept the name simple, deliberate. It wasn't about branding. It was about what my father believed in: dignity through documentation, accountability through action. I didn't hire lawyers from prestigious firms. I hired the people Devin discarded: warehouse workers who'd been fired after filing complaints, a single mom who used to log night shifts while fighting for benefits, a line cook from the cafeteria who once found altered payroll slips in the trash. These weren't just employees, they were witnesses. I paid them real salaries, full benefits. Overtime, when they stayed late. We turned our grief into a machine. We built a system for intake, for verifying claims, for collecting digital proof. We taught workers how to screenshot, how to save emails, how to recognize when policy was really exploitation in disguise. Our first 6 reports involved cleaning companies and delivery contractors. The violations were depressingly familiar: clock-in manipulation, stolen tips, fake promotion, promises that never came. By the end of the quarter, we'd already filed 3 class action suits and won the first one. Cordelia from Redwell sent a note: "Didn't realize you'd go this far. I underestimated you." I didn't respond. The easy thing would have been to vanish, buy a warm house somewhere coastal, find peace in distance and disconnection. But peace didn't feel like justice, not when the same men who laughed in conference rooms still sat behind glass walls cashing bonuses on the backs of people, too afraid to speak up. So instead, I stayed. I built something permanent. And when I looked around at the people working beside me, people who once feared their own managers, I knew I'd made the right choice. The week our 3rd lawsuit landed in federal court, a letter arrived with no return address, postmarked 2 towns over. Inside was a notebook, Devin's. The notebook was bound in cracked brown leather, the kind you'd expect to find in a dusty antique store, not in the mailbox of a woman who'd burned down a logistics empire. Tucked beneath the cover was a note scribbled in rushed handwriting. He kept this: "I thought you should have it. CC, as in Colleen Krantz, Devin's wife, or ex-wife, I assumed now." I flipped through the pages, half expecting nothing but bitter ramblings. But what I found was astonishing. Meticulous time-stamped entries, employee names, figures, sloppy pseudonyms masking cash transactions, notes like 3K under table to RW to bury complaint, D's signature spoofed, and Janice flagged HR form redirected through Thorn login. There were names I hadn't seen before: mid-level managers, HR reps, even someone on the compliance board. All of them implicated in the cover-ups. Each entry read like a confession, raw and unfiltered, as if Devin had been trying to keep track of the rot and maybe in some twisted way prove he was more than just a cog. He was the hand turning the wheel. I scanned one entry 3 times before the weight of it fully settled: payroll rollback coordinated BAUAS execs from Trask Freight. Shared system patch from Vanguard, same scheme applied. Trask Freight was a completely different company, bigger, more powerful. They'd never been touched in any investigation. My pulse ticked up. I handed the notebook off to our legal team that afternoon. Within 48 hours, we submitted an amended complaint to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Devin's ledger didn't just implicate Vanguard's leadership. It opened the door to an entire network of companies that had borrowed their fraud model like a best practice. And just like that, our next wave began. Devin had written his own indictment and unknowingly expanded our reach tenfold. When the subpoena landed on Trask Freight's legal desk, the silence that followed was telling. Their media team said nothing. Their stock dipped quietly like a ship starting to take on water. The Thorn Initiative's inbox lit up overnight. Dozens of new reports, different logos, same stories. We filed the first class action suit in Pennsylvania, then New Jersey, then Missouri. The strategy was tight, deliberate. Build momentum, stack victories, force a pattern the courts couldn't ignore. 6 months later, the numbers spoke for themselves. 11.2 million in stolen wages recovered, 8 warehouse managers indicted, and more than 24 companies rewriting internal policies before we even reached their doorsteps. Some tried to spin it as moral awakening. Others admitted privately they were just scared. Either way, it worked. Workers we'd never met started forwarding us screenshots, memos, and emails. Each one was like a match waiting to be struck. The people who once thought silence kept them safe were now putting names to what they endured and demanding back every cent. One man, a forklift driver from Illinois, cried on the phone when he got his restitution check. "I didn't think anyone would ever believe me," he said. They believed him now. A month later, I received an invitation from a congressional labor committee asking me to testify on corporate wage theft and fraud. I declined. I didn't need to be on camera. That wasn't the point. "This isn't about me," I told the chairperson's aide over the phone. "It's about the people who never got to speak in rooms like that." Instead, I sent a binder. Inside, 63 pages of testimony, all anonymous, all from the workers we'd helped. Their words, not mine. Their voices carried forward. The Thorn Initiative's name had started showing up in board meetings and budget proposals whispered in the hallways of legal departments. Companies didn't fear lawsuits, they feared us noticing. But we didn't just notice. We watched, we tracked, we documented. The more we won, the louder the silence from the corporate side became. And the quieter they got, the more the workers came to us, nervous, hesitant, but ready. We'd built something they couldn't ignore, and we weren't finished. The morning our 4th national case hit the headlines, I opened my office drawer, reached past Devin's notebook, and pulled out the last unopened envelope my father had left me. The courtroom was cold in a way that had nothing to do with air conditioning. Devin sat at the defense table in a too large suit, thinner than I remembered, eyes sunken and restless. When the judge read the sentence, 9 years federal custody, he didn't blink. But when they asked me if I had anything to say, he turned. I stood slowly holding my father's original handwritten note in my palm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tremble. "You denied me 3 days with my dying father," I said. "I gave you 9 years to think about it." He looked down. He didn't say a word. Weeks later, a letter came. No return address, but I knew the handwriting slanted, controlled. Devin. Inside was a 2-page plea for forgiveness, filled with justifications and regrets. I didn't read past the first line. I folded it once and slid it into the back of my father's audit folder untouched. Vanguard never recovered. Their leadership scattered like leaves in wind, and Redwell acquired what was left. But they did so under contract, new policies, transparent practices, full access granted to the Thorn Initiative. No exceptions. Our name began to appear in training manuals, in boardroom minutes, in legal threat assessments. Not because we were a problem, but because we were the answer companies were suddenly afraid to avoid. Workers began organizing. Companies that had silenced complaints for years were suddenly posting hotline numbers in employee lounges. And I kept showing up not to speak, but to stand in the back of rooms to shake hands with the people who once thought they had no worth. One evening, I returned to my apartment, poured a cup of tea, and sat at my father's old desk. I opened a fresh notebook, wrote a single sentence, and closed it again. This is how it ends. With silence, with balance, with justice. Then I filed the notebook away and turned out the light, knowing the next case was already forming. And this time, I wouldn't have to fight alone.